This episode of Q Point Podcast is pre-recorded, produced and sponsored by Karina Quirk, broker at Next Home Experience.
Different views.
I know your story.
From different cues.
Incredible job.
He's David Quirk.
You brought it up.
And she's Karina Quirk.
Imagine.
This is
Q Point.
Thank you for joining us for part 2 with Maine State Representative Chad Perkins.
So tell us a little bit about Bill LD 1009.
So LD 1009 would restore the Second Amendment rights of certain individuals who were convicted of nonviolent felonies. And that's a little bit of a misnomer because it would also restore the rights of people who have lost their Second Amendment rights because they were convicted of a misdemeanor. Now that surprises a lot of people. Everybody knows that if you're a felon, you can have a firearm, right? A lot of people don't realize that you could be convicted of a misdemeanor, never serve a day in jail. And we're not talking about a domestic violence misdemeanor. It could be fraud. It could be any other nonviolent crime. But you can get convicted of a nonviolent crime misdemeanor, never serve a day in jail, and still lose your Second Amendment rights for the rest of your life. And that's because of something called sentence equivalence. Let's say you get charged with fraud. We'll use fraud. And it's a misdemeanor fraud case. And you get sentenced to 6 months in jail. But you can't do 6 months of jail because you're the provider for your family. If you go to jail, your family's really going to suffer. So you talk to the prosecutor and like, listen, I'll work out a deal. Instead of 6 months in jail, I'll take 2 years probation. Prosecutor's like, yep, that's fine. Well, you don't go to jail. You continue to feed your family. It's not a felony, but because you agreed to that 2 years of probation, you now are considered the same as a felon when it comes to Second Amendment rights. So you've now lost an actual constitutional right guaranteed by the Constitution and written in the Bill of Rights. You've now lost that right for the rest of your life. So what this bill would do, let's say that you were convicted of a felony one time, and this happens all the time. Since I put this bill in the 131st, I put it in again in the 132nd. There are thousands of people in the state of Maine. 18 years old, they did something stupid, but it's a felony. And the most common one is burglary. They were dumb, broke into a camp, didn't steal anything. Maybe they did steal something, but never been in trouble again for the rest of life because they got caught, they got convicted, they got scared straight, and never did anything else again in the rest of their life criminally. No other criminal record after that. But they can never own a firearm again. What most people don't realize is because of the sentence equivalency, they've lost their Second Amendment right for the rest of their life. They can't go hunting. They can't defend their family. They can't teach their kid to shoot. And this is a constitutional right. It's written into the Constitution. It's one of the Bill of Rights. So what this bill would do basically is, let's say you get in trouble and you wait a period of years, 10 years, and you don't get in any trouble for that 10 years. You would be able to go to the court and say, hey, I know I got in trouble, but I've paid my debt to society. I served my time, if there's any time involved. I've paid any restitution. I've done all my court requirements. So if there was fines to the court, if there was any fees to the courts, I've done all that. And I've gone 10 years without getting in trouble. Then the court would look at that and go, okay, you're now eligible to get your Second Amendment rights back. Once they do that and they get those rights back, if they screw it up again, they would lose it just like anybody else that committed a crime. And they would not be eligible for a second chance after that. Because then they're showing that they have this propensity not to follow the law. But for the one-time felon, for the guy that is convicted of a misdemeanor who really shouldn't have lost their Second Amendment rights because there's no historical precedent in our country where someone who's a nonviolent person, someone who hasn't committed a felony, they should never have those rights taken away. This gives them the ability to get that back. So I brought this bill forward in the 131st, and I actually got it through committee because back in the 131st, all the gun bills came to my committee, the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee. I actually got it through committee, and it went to the speaker to be brought forward on the floor, and it was never brought forward for a vote. So it died at the end of the legislative session, never having had a vote on the floor. So something different happened in the 132nd, our current legislature. All the gun stuff now goes to the Judiciary Committee, which is up to the leaders. I guess they can choose where the bills go, how they get referenced, but that's not traditional. Normally, gun stuff goes to criminal justice and public safety. Now it goes to judiciary. So I brought the bill back and had a hearing in front of the Judiciary Committee, and it did not pass the committee. So they have something called a divided report. The Republicans voted for it. The Democrats voted against it. So when it gets brought to the floor for a vote, I'm going to fight it on the floor and hopefully convince enough people on the other side of the aisle to vote with us. And hopefully we can get this passed on the floor.
What was the biggest concern that the other side had?
I think the biggest concern the other side had with the committee that it went in front of now was that it had the word firearm in it. The chairs of the Judiciary Committee are known to be extremely anti-firearm. So the reason we went with the 10-year mark is because down in Florida, when they had looked at a process to go through this same thing where they would allow people to have their firearms rights back, so they actually did a study, and this was some years ago, and they found that anybody that went 7 years without committing another crime had almost a 0% chance of recidivism. So my thought was, well, if Florida says 7 years is good enough because they actually did a study and said, hey, someone that commits a crime and then doesn't commit another crime for 7 years is probably never going to commit a crime again, then 10 years ought to be good enough. The other thing that is different about this is a lot of states have a process for getting guns back. But the problem is that when you go to buy a gun at a gun store, you go through a national background check. So while a state may give you the right to own a firearm back, you won't have the ability to go buy it from a gun store. So, for example, in Florida, you might get your guns back, but you can't go to a gun store that is federally licensed and pass a federal background check to get a gun. You might be able to buy a gun from your neighbor because there's no background check required there, and you're not breaking Florida law, but you can't go to Palmetto State Arms, which has their headquarters down there, and buy a gun from them because when they run a check on you, you're going to fail. The way this law was written, and it's unique among all the other states that do firearms restoration, is this one is actually a full civil rights restoration bill. So just like at one point, felons couldn't vote anywhere in the country, and a lot of states have restored the right to vote to felons because it's a civil right. Well, I view the Second Amendment as a civil right. So the way this bill was specifically written, if you meet all these requirements, you're not really getting back your Second Amendment right. You're not getting back your right to own a firearm. You are getting all of your civil rights back. And that includes the ability to have a firearm under the Second Amendment. And under 18 U.S.C. 922, which is federal law, it specifically says that if someone has had all their civil rights restored, they are no longer a prohibited person under federal law. So where my bill would be unique is that not only would they no longer be prohibited from having a firearm in the state, they would then be eligible to go to a federal firearms dealer and buy a gun, and they wouldn't be breaking any federal law. They would be able to pass that background check. Additionally, they would be able to do anything else out of state that any other Maine citizen could do. So that's how this bill is unique than any other firearms restoration law that any other state has.
So let me ask you this. What was your inspiration on this bill?
Years ago, when I first got to Maine, I worked for Foxcroft Academy. There was a young man there that got himself in a little trouble. He and another young man, while they were still in high school, but they were 18, decided to break into the school and cause some mischief. They were both convicted of burglary. Well, he's an adult now. He's quite a few years older. He can never own a firearm. I lost contact with him for years, but since then, he and I have become very good friends. And just one day he said to me, he's like, Chad, it sure would be nice if I could go hunting. And I said, well, why can't you? And of course, I'd never thought of it. He goes, because I got convicted of that burglary when I broke into the school, this other kid. And I know this kid. He's worked for the hospital systems. He handles medications. He's never been in trouble again. He's an outstanding citizen, a great guy. So I said, we ought to address this. So I started doing some research. And in doing research and talking to people, I had people start reaching out to me. So then I submitted the initial bill. Once the initial bill came back from the revisor's office and was published, if I didn't have 4,000 people call me, email, write me, and said, hey, this is going to affect my life. This is exactly my situation. I did not realize how many people in the state of Maine there were that this affected. There are people in the state house that work at the state house that came to me and said, don't tell anybody, but if your bill passes, I'll be able to own a firearm again. It's not something that if you were in that category, you're going to go on and announce it's something you're proud of, right? I did not realize how many people this affected. And of course, everybody says, well, you can get a pardon. You're not going to get a pardon. Nobody gets a pardon. That's a non-existent process. But the reality is this is going to affect quite a few Mainers all over the state. Every representative should vote for this because this will affect a lot of people in your district.
You are listening to Q Point Podcast. I'm Karina Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a discussion with Maine State Representative Chad Perkins. So you're running for Senate, and you are in a 4-way Republican primary. Tell us about it.
Well, that's interesting. It's actually the busiest, most crowded race outside of the governor's race. It's a little bit surprising. I wasn't going to run for the Senate originally. I had no desire to run for the Senate. I still have 2 terms left in the House I could run before I term out. And that was my original plan. Do 4 terms in the House and then be done. I was approached by leadership and several representatives in our area and said, would you please run for the Senate seat? And they finally talked me into it. So there was one other young man running, a young man that I've known for some time. He's a nice young man, but I think I can do a better job than he can. And so I decided to run. And then sometime after my campaign was announced, 2 other gentlemen decided to run. And all 4 of us, my 3 opponents, they're all nice guys, good men. There's no doubt in my military mind that they're all good conservative men. But I really think that I would do a much better job. I think I have much more experience policy-wise. And I also think that I would be able to do more for my constituents. Just in the 2 terms that I've been down there, I've been one of the most successful members of the minority party in authoring and sponsoring legislation and getting it through. I don't know if that's because I write well or if I argue well on the floor, but I've been known to flip a few votes, then win votes that we shouldn't have won, and I've done the same in the committee room. So I think that I'd be able to do a much better job than any of the men that I'm running against. It is a much different race running for the Senate than it is to the House. Obviously, running to represent 7 towns, I don't have to drive as much as I do having to run for all of Piscataquis County and 11 towns in Penobscot County. But it's good. And the towns that I'm running for in Penobscot County, it's actually not that bad because most of those towns, I have some kind of contacts or roots or nexus or something to anyways. I grew up in Carmel. I went to school in Herman. So you look at Levant, Glenburn, and there's people that I went to high school with that still live in that area. I go to church in Exeter, and Exeter is one of the towns that I'm going to represent. Charleston, Corinth, we do a lot of business down there. One of the organizations I'm involved with, I'm building a health clinic in Corinth. Dexter, we do a lot in Dexter. So it's really not that bad because these towns are not completely foreign to me, even though they're not in my county. So it's actually kind of nice. It's exciting. One of the things that did surprise me is the amount of money that's involved in running for the Senate, especially when you have a primary. I self-funded my first 2 campaigns, and where my opponents, I didn't have any primaries. I just ran against the other party. And where my opponents spent tens of thousands of dollars, I went and won my races on, I think one time I spent like $2,700. And now I'm having to spend more than that right now just to win a primary race. So that was kind of surprising to me, but I guess that's the nature of politics and winning races, right? So it is fun. It's interesting. A lot of work, making a lot of town meetings. In fact, I think I've been to almost all the town meetings so far since I've announced, and I've got even a town meeting tonight. So I'm trying to get out there as much as I can. And obviously we're in session, so I have to work that around the session schedule, but it's good to get out there and meet people and see people and reacquaint myself with some people that maybe I haven't seen in a couple of years, but I'm really enjoying the race.
So when you're out there, what are you hearing the most from the people?
I think the biggest problem is the fact that, because, we have a small business, but one of the biggest problems we have right now is that it's really hard to run a business. Maine is not a business-friendly state. We have some of the highest energy costs. We have some of the highest regulatory costs. Taxes are just through the roof. What would really incentivize a company to come here and set up or to set up here? I mean, if you're going to start a company, let's say you got this whiz-bang idea, you're going to build the best widget in the world. Well, why would you start it here? Why wouldn't you go somewhere where you can build it so much cheaper and increase your profit? Maine is great because we have small businesses. I think that's like 1 in 14 people in the state of Maine owns a small business. That's a phenomenal number. But it's hard for those people because they're dealing with the high energy costs. They're dealing with the high taxes. They're dealing with the high regulatory costs. If you are into business, you got to make every penny count, especially when you're first starting a business. I mean, those are the hardest years. If you have no business experience, especially because you're trying to figure things out, and yet you don't have assets built up maybe from having been in business for a few years. So when you're trying to make every penny count, and yet your energy bill goes up again, that really hurts. I'm talking to grocery stores. I had one grocery store tell me they have these big coolers, right? Their electric bill went from $6,000 a month to $18,000 a month. Guess what? They're not eating that cost. That cost is going to get passed on to the consumer. So people, they're going to pay more in food costs. Everything is more expensive because of policy. People talk about it costs this much because of this. It costs this much because of that. No, all of our costs are policy related. Our energy costs are policy related. Our taxes are policy related. Our regulatory costs are policy related. People talk about the cost of housing. People don't realize the fastest growing increase in the cost of housing is regulatory costs. The cost of getting permitted, the cost of setbacks, the cost of having people wait around for a contract crew. All those costs add up. Again, that's all policy related. If people under the dome or people down on the second floor down there could actually realize how much damage we're doing down in Augusta, we could make Maine a business-friendly state, but we don't. And they sit around with these grand ideas that they think they're helping people, but they're hurting people. You look at minimum wage. Portland just went to a $19 minimum wage. You know what the real minimum wage is? Real minimum wage is $0. Because when a company can't afford to pay anybody and they close up shop, that job isn't there. That minimum wage then is $0. You look at paid family medical leave. We think we're doing people a favor. I tell you, we've talked to recruiters. It's a new world now. People work from home, and you don't have to work for a company in Maine. You get these people, they'll call people, say, hey, you've got a skill set. They're calling for a company in, let's say, Iowa, but they're hiring people all over the country because they have a skill set. You got a computer. You can do your work from your house, your nice house in Maine where you want to live. But they're not going to call you in Maine because Maine is a blacklisted state. And why are they not going to call people in Maine? Because that employer in Iowa now has to deal with the labor laws that we've enacted in Maine. So why are they going to call someone in Maine knowing that someone in Maine could just go and take a couple months off and they have to pay them when they're just going to call somebody in a state that doesn't have paid family medical leave? It's going to be cheaper and better for that company. So they're never going to call somebody in Maine. And that's what's happening. We think we're helping the people in Maine, and all we do is hurt them time and time again. It's ridiculous. It's funny because someone at the last session on the other side told me that they wanted a full-time legislature. And I had to shake my head. I'm thinking, look at the damage we do when we're only down there a couple months. Imagine the damage we would do to the people and the economy in the state of Maine if we were down there year-round.
Now, you have a small hospital in your district, is that right?
We do. So we have a small hospital that is now owned by Northern Light. Yes.
And I know, talking to a few doctors, that it's hard to compete to get new doctors because of some of the things that you have mentioned. So it must be hard to get providers up there in that rural area.
Yeah, I see this myself because I'm the vice chair of a FQAC, or a federally qualified health center. A couple of years ago, we built a clinic in Dover. It's the same outfit that's building a clinic in Corinth right now. And it's not just the doctors, it's all of our providers, and it's some of the support staff, because these people know that they can work anywhere in the country. They have skill sets that are in demand. If they can make more money somewhere else, and on top of that, pay less in taxes, pay less in energy costs, pay less in all these other costs of living costs, why would they come here? The scenery up here is great, but it only goes so far.
You are listening to Q Point Podcast. I'm Karina Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a discussion with Maine State Representative Chad Perkins. So you've served in the military. Thank you for your service. You've served in law enforcement, and you have a small business. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I was born out of state. I was born in New York, but I grew up in Maine. I graduated from Herman High School. And then I went off to the Army. It's funny because I originally wasn't planning on staying in the Army that long. I had some scholastic scholarships and I was going to go to college. But in my family, if you can serve, you serve. The thing is, once I got in the Army, I liked it so much I stayed, which is a good thing because I met my beautiful wife, who was a fellow soldier, and we got married. And then after several years in the Army, we started having more kids, and I stayed on active duty. She got out into the reserves, and I had stayed for quite a while. And again, originally hadn't decided to make it a career, but at some point you get to that tipping point. You're like, I might as well stay the full 20, right? So we made that decision that I was going to stay for the full 20 years. And then life again happened, and I suffered from a medical event that basically changed that choice for me, and I had to get out of the Army. We came to Maine. Dolly, my wife, became a realtor because of my health condition. I wasn't at that time able to provide for my family. And I've since recovered fairly well. And then I realized I was given kind of a second chance in life after this big health scare. And so I was going to dedicate my life to public service. And so at that point, I went into the law enforcement and as a volunteer firefighter, and then started volunteering for organizations that I thought I could help my community with. So over the years, I've been on the board of EMS services, serving with food cupboards, with this FQHC and various other organizations. And that's kind of where I put my focus. So over the years, we have had several small businesses. At one point, we had an IT company. We did mostly work with business customers. We had customers from Fort Kent down to Boston, everything from installing servers to running fiber optic cable and maintaining those. We had a cell phone distributorship at one point. We had a small advertising paper at one point, and currently we have a real estate brokerage up in Dover, Foxcroft.
I did hear through the grapevine that you are an expert in computer crimes. Is that right?
I have served as an expert witness and sometimes consult as an expert witness in computer crimes and forensic data recovery. Yes.
Tell us a story.
So there are times when the courts have hired me. So if you are a defendant, let's say you get charged with a crime and you have to get a court-appointed attorney because you can't afford an attorney, you're entitled to the same level of defense as the prosecution can bring. So a lot of times the courts will hire me to provide that same level of expertise. So it's kind of an interesting thing because I'm working for the defense, even though I have been on the other side of the aisle, with the prosecution as a police officer. But I tell the person's attorney, I'm going to look at the evidence. And if the material's there, I'm going to tell you, you can decide whether or not to put me on the stand. You can decide what you're going to do with me from there. And there actually has been cases where someone was exonerated because I was able to look at the evidence and then decide that maybe the crime that the person was charged with wasn't committed. But for the most part, the attorney has decided to use the information that I gave them to make a plea deal.
Seems like there is a lot of cybercrime out there now than ever before.
There definitely is. And it actually is getting easier now because it used to be years ago. And most of the cases I dealt with were not really your cyber attack crime type things. They were everything from, unfortunately, child pornography cases up to fraud cases involving video where someone might try to fake something and then I would have to go and authenticate video. But there were a few cases where I looked at penetration attacks on networks. And it used to be that you actually had to have some knowledge to do that. And now, believe it or not, with AI, almost anybody can do it. Someone can get online, tell AI, hey, write me an exploit that will attack this system with this type of attack, and AI will write it for you. So it's becoming a lot easier for people to be able to penetrate cybersecurity systems. But at the same time, cybersecurity professionals know this, and they harden down their systems to counteract that. It's a constant back and forth. It always has been.
Do you have 25 kids?
No. People ask us that question, and I always say 11. Okay, and it's because people want simple. Dolly and I always say, there's the family you're born into and the family you make. So we have 7 biological kids. But then we have a couple others that were not biological, but they are just as much family to us. So we have one adopted child. We have one child that we're permanent guardian. And then we have a couple of foster children that have just stayed with the family, and they're our kids. We're mom and dad. Always will be mom and dad. They still call us mom and dad. They're our kids. For simplicity, I always say 11. But having said that, there are still other foster kids that we've had over the years that we still have contact with that maybe weren't with us that long. But for simplicity, I always say 11.
One of the ages.
Our oldest is 35, about to be 36, and our youngest is 15, about to be 16.
Did they all stay in the area?
Most of them. One of them lives down in South Portland. One of them lives in Brunswick. And then the rest of them are either building houses on our property or they have houses just down the street from us. But so they're all very close.
And do they like politics?
I wouldn't say they like politics. I don't like politics, but they do help me with my campaign. I actually had 4 town meetings Saturday morning. And then that afternoon, we had to be in New Hampshire so I could pin sergeant stripes on my youngest son, Owen. So Dolly and I had a pretty busy day on Saturday. I needed someone to go to some of these other town meetings because obviously I can't be at all of them at once. So my son, Liam, went to the town of Garland for me, and my son-in-law, Matt, went to the town of Charleston for me. And then I had a friend of mine go to the town of Bradford for me. So I was able to go to Corinna, which is important because I had to present a legislative sentiment to one of the gentlemen in Corinna. So I wouldn't say they're into politics. They are very supportive of me, and I'm very grateful for that.
Wow, 11, that means you can field a football team.
Yep.
Before we let you go, if elected as senator, do you have a focus for the next session?
Yeah. One of the things that's very important to me is the Government Oversight Committee. And as I mentioned before, there's 6 from each party, 3 from the House, 3 from the Senate from each party. All 3 of the Republican senators on government oversight are terming out. So one of the things that I would really, really like to do is to return to government oversight as a returning member on the committee, but this time as a senator, to ensure that we have some leadership on the Republican side of the House in that committee, and to ensure that somebody that has some experience dealing with this Maine care fraud is still on the committee so that I can continue to look into that and make sure that the committee pursues that fully.
Representative Chad Perkins, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks for coming in. We appreciate your time, and we know you're busy.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
You've been listening to Q Point.
Follow us at qpointpodcast.com or on your favorite streaming app.
This is where you can get the news from the people who make the news.
Make sure to join us next time.
We hope you tune in.
Q Point Podcast invites guests and candidates from all parties to join the conversation. The views, information, opinions, and comments expressed during this program do not necessarily represent those of the host, Q Point Podcast, associates, affiliates, and CQRE LLC.
Thanks for being a part of the conversation. The most important voices aren't always the loudest ones. They're the voices of everyday people, raising families, running businesses, serving their towns. That's who we want to hear from. Share your ideas with us online, and let's make sure those voices are never left out. Find us on Facebook or on X or at qpointpodcast.com. We look forward to hearing from you. Catch every episode at qpointpodcast.com or wherever you stream. Tune in and tell your friends.